was 1994. Home computers had taken the world by storm, and king of the technology hill was Microsoft. Windows ran on every home PC, every workstation, and even ATM machines. The behemoth had gotten its start in the 80s, when a young Bill Gates was getting his start in the software business with a friend. Their software went viral, being packaged with every IBM computer sold to market. Then came the biggest change in tech ever, the internet. Microsoft was quick to react, building a new internet browser for its users to work on. However, not all was well with Microsoft. A new company, Netscape, had entered the ring, creating a faster, simpler browser to use the web. Microsoft didn't like this. The years following led to one of the most important court cases of recent history. This court case is known as the Microsoft antitrust case.
Although a tragedy for consumer rights and an inept ability of government regulation was created from the precedent set by the outcome of the court case, the federal antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft by the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. was a triumph for Microsoft's ability to rebound from its failures and in the process create technology barely encumbered by regulation while creating more competition in the industry.
What led to initial concerns over Microsoft's practices was their violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. This federal law was created in the late 19th century to outlaw monopolistic business practices and was the first of its kind. It was immensely important in the early 20th century due to a crackdown on many monopolizing corporations, including that of the Standard Oil Company and other large trusts. The key aspect of the Sherman Antitrust Act was to keep large companies in check and eliminate a hostile takeover of the market through monopolizing their given industries. In the case of the Standard Oil Company, it was ordered by the Supreme Court to be broken up. As for Microsoft, during the late 90s, this act and the consequences started to become all too real.
During the 90s, Microsoft was known to make deals to further expand its product over different devices and make it the prime holder of the computer market. As early as 1990, the U.S. government was investigating the company of suspicious actions when the Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation between Microsoft and IBM.
You see, by that time, Bill had already figured out that we got to go right into the belly of the beast, the scariest beast of them all, IBM. IBM. And back then, man, they were like Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, and Vlad the Impaler, all rolled into one.
In which there is possible collusion in the PC software market. Other instances of Microsoft's aggressive actions took place throughout the early to mid-90s, such as a $150 million investment in Apple Computer and a proposed merger between Microsoft and Intuit in 1995, which would have destroyed any competition in the electronic checkbook market. Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson, the judge on trial during this case in the United States Supreme Court, found the company maintained its monopoly power by anti-competitive means and attempted to monopolize the web browser market by unlawful tying. Windows Internet Explorer derived not from the technical necessity or business efficientness, rather it was the result of a deliberate and purposeful choice to quell competition before it reached intimidating proportions. This decision to make these operating systems a weapon over competitors rather than a tool for the public is what led to the court's inevitable decision to deem Microsoft a monopoly and its violation of antitrust laws. In 2000, Judge Jackson decreed that Microsoft should be split into two halves, one dedicated to Windows and the other to everything else from Microsoft. Microsoft's monopolistic tendencies came to a precipice when the Justice Department accused Microsoft for a violation of the 1995 consent decree, which was created to forbid the company from using Windows to dominate and undermine its competition. Microsoft demanded PC manufacturers to bundle Internet Explorer's web browser with their hardware products before being able to obtain a Windows 95 license. They made it so Windows users could not delete Internet Explorer from their Windows 95 systems without breaking core functionality. Netscape, a newer manufacturer of software which rivaled Microsoft's own, was harmed by the company's aggressive actions toward focusing users to use its software, leading the court's accusations.
Power and ease of use. It's free at Netscape.com.
By bundling the technological programs together as to keep the consumers invested in their products alone and to not have their programs work with competing companies such as Apple software, and eliminated the chances of money being spent on software programs other than that of their own. Thus, on May 18, 1998, Microsoft was accused of violating U.S. antitrust laws, illegally tying products together and unfairly expanding its monopoly to drive software competitors out of business.
Although Microsoft was ordered to split up, The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected Jackson's decree and instead in November of 2001 decided to make Microsoft's hardware easier for competitors to get their own software more closely integrated with the Windows operating system. After the whole debacle concluded by 2002, Microsoft was left in disarray with its stock value dropped significantly and new competitors like Google, Apple, and Amazon eventually taking the valuable tech marketplace in which Microsoft once reigned supreme. Yet Microsoft, a declared monopoly, was still completely together and didn't lose any assets. The US government was not able to fully control what was a monopoly and let the company go without that harsh of a punishment at all. Microsoft violated the Sherman Antitrust Act but still stands to this day. The tragedy of the outcome of the case, through Microsoft's evasion of any tangible consequences, was the disadvantage of consumer protections and consumer rights. Microsoft's actions ended up setting a precedent for large technology corporations that hurt the consumer for the increase of profits. When Microsoft forced the courts into submission, they set a precedent that every large tech company up to today now follows. Instead of offering a product and having to compete with other products in the same category, offer consumers an ecosystem of software and hardware products that only work with each other. If you wanted Windows 95, you had to put up with Internet Explorer. If you wanted to put songs on your iPod, you had to use iTunes. It didn't matter if somebody could make a better product, you could just refuse to make it compatible with the product that it needs to work with. They laid a foundation not only for the rise of modern tech platforms like Google, but for the way we think about regulating these platforms, or have neglected to do so, said Addie Robertson, one senior reporter for The Verge. We can see this in the current time with the YouTube debacle. When Amazon refused to sell Google Home products in its store due to competition, Google refused to allow Amazon's Fire TV units to access the YouTube app. Many consumers who didn't care about the company's spat were inconvenienced by losing the ability to use the largest video streaming site in the world. It is this pure ownership of different categories in the internet's market today, which stems from Microsoft's court session, which happened now more than 20 years ago. In the middle of all this, the consumer is thrown around between fluctuating prices and a lack of quality. When an industry has competition, the price of the products are reduced while quality is increased. Now, with the destruction of Microsoft's monopoly, there is more competition in the industry, yet with the control over specific internet markets such as Amazon and deliveries, Google and web browsing, and YouTube and media, it leaves no space for innovation and thus the reduction in quality on those platforms.
As for Microsoft, their time of falling behind in the industry has come to an end. If you take a look at the stock history of Microsoft, you can clearly see a significant drop in the value per share of stock after the verdict of the trial. However, this depression is not permanent. After a decade booming with innovation, the Microsoft stock began to climb once more. Their stock prices have since doubled what they once were at the peak of their monopoly. This just goes to show that the government has no real substantial and impactful way of regulating the economic success of rapidly growing corporations. This failure to regulate set a precedent of many corporations in which the rules don't apply to them anymore. Apple, for instance, has seen their fair share of lawsuits, including that of violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. These can be seen through the Apple, iPod, iTunes antitrust litigation, Apple and AT&T mobility antitrust class action, and high-tech employee antitrust litigation. Despite all of these times the government has intervened, there is no real way to stop innovation, so they continue to grasp their stranglehold on the American market. Apple continuously creates more products that only run their own software without regard to competition, because the court set this standard of ignorance. While the implications of Microsoft's hearing led to many immediate changes, both positive and negative, the lasting effects, more than 30 years later, have changed the entire industry.
From the triumphs and tragedies caused by their actions, we can see now how Microsoft has dramatically altered history through their choice to relegate the benefit of the people to under the shareholders' thirst for increasing profits. And at the time it seemed like they were the unstoppable kings of the feudalistic tech industry. While Microsoft was able to get away with an intimidating display of how untouchable they were in the industry, the effects on the paradigm of modern tech and advertising companies changed the way they offer and use services, to the detriment of the consumer and Microsoft itself, but a triumph in paving the way for the advanced software we have access to. This is a powerful reminder that if we as the people allow power to go unbalanced, it will end up coming back to change our integrity in the future.